All right, friends, it is day 2 of week 1. It is our office hour, and we are jumping into really just all the stuff that we need for our projects. One big thing that you're going to be working on or working with is something called environment variables. Does anybody know, before I jump in and mansplain what environment variable is, does anybody already know what that is? And maybe they can give some insight to what that is?
Is that kind of like a global variable?
Not quite a global. Well, you can think about it that way. I think that's a really interesting way to think about it. Yeah, where you can see it's different than a global variable, but it is globally available. If that's what, yeah, it's
Sure,
globally
I'll take that.
available. Yeah, great idea. Anybody else have an idea?
Wasn't that where in JavaScript you put like the port number and stuff like that?
So yeah, there's you can do a port number with an environment variable. That's a really common way to use it. Really, all an environment variable is sometimes we have sensitive information. That's going to be a ton of things. If you guys took Python, then you probably remembered that config file uh, where you kind of connected to the database, and in that you actually put your password in plain text, right? That's not something we'd really want to do. We want to make sure that we keep our passwords secret. We don't want anybody to be able to have access. So what we use is something called an environment variable. All an environment variable is there's a tool, the most popular is called .env, that allows us to create a file of all of our secrets. And then we can just say, okay, whenever my code, I refer to something, I'm going to say, okay, this is the variable I need, and it's going to go to my secret file. It's going to grab the information and it's going to put it in its place, right? But when we load our code up to GitHub, we're not going to include that. We're going to actually put it in our gitignore file, so that way people can't see it. Things like database passwords is going to be massive, right? Something like that. If you're dealing with the cloud, oftentimes just within the cloud itself, you can create an environment variable, so you don't have to have the .env file. But for what we're doing, we're going to be doing it this way because it's not hosted and there's not instances in the cloud. Another big thing with environment variables is, let's pretend we wanted to use Google Maps API. And we wanted to, let's say we're creating the new Yelp. It's going to be a better Yelp. Great. And we want to integrate Google Maps, right? Even like our Tesla has a Google Maps API, right? Or uses Google Maps. Everything's sort of built on top of Google Maps. And so what we can do is we can use this API to be able to make calls to Google, or say, hey, whenever I want, or I'm going to give some information, what I want for you to do is give me back a map of Seattle, of Portland, of Boise, right? And so that's just an API. It's just as simple as the request response cycle that you guys have seen before. You guys actually built basically an API. That's what the server was when you did Java, when you did Python, when you did JavaScript. You had your back end and then you had your front end, right? And your front end just made requests to your back end. And especially if you were in JavaScript, you know this, you'd have 2 different ports, right? Where you had your React on one side and your Node on the other. That's basically what an API call is, right? And so when we are dealing with APIs, application programming interface, that's what API stands for. They are everywhere. It's really big in the development. I mean, that's huge, right? That's how a lot of companies make a lot of money, how you integrate, how you build apps really quickly, how you have cool features. When you're now saying, like, everybody's saying AI, open AI, you have APIs that you can do, ChatGPT that you can do and build upon. And so APIs are something that we can use and bring into our website or our application to make it really, really powerful. Now, some APIs are free, right? So you guys probably did the Pokédex API, the Pokemon API, or you did the Swappy, the Star Wars API, where you just sort of made a call to the API and you wanted people and it gave you back some piece of information, right? This is free. That's great. Those are awesome. We love free APIs. Not every API, though, is free. And if you sort of think about why, it's because Google created this entire system, right? They spent money to build out Google Maps, to improve Google Maps. They are hosting Google Maps. So they have servers all over the world that host and have this code. And so they're saying, hey, instead of giving out for free, we should make some money off of this because it's costing us a lot of money. And so some APIs will introduce something called pricing, right? Where you've got some sort of pay as you go. A lot of them are pay as you go, to where you can say, okay, if I make 1,000 requests, in this case, this Maps embedded API is $0. But if I wanted to use the JavaScript API, if I make 1,000 requests, it's going to cost me $7 a month. Right? If I've got a huge application, and again, like Tesla, you think every time I turn it on, it has a map and it's by Google, right? Every time it's making a request, you can start seeing how they're making some real money, right? Because this is only 405,000, but if Yelp is doing this and they're having, all around the world, people are going on their map, they can make some serious cash that way. And so how do they know who's making this request, right? How do they know, okay, well, it is Fasika's application that's making the request, or 1,000 of these requests, so we know to charge them X amount, or, it's Brittany's mobile application that people are using a lot, so we need to charge, right, this unique identifier. And that's where something called an API key comes in. An API key. Now, all an API key is a unique identifier. Think about like a social security number or some sort of unique identifier. Really, all it will be is you will make a request. And with that request, you're basically showing your ID, your API key, and you're saying, hey, when I make this request, I want, here's who to charge. Here's kind of my credit card, if you will, or here's my account number, and then they'll kind of bill you accordingly. Now, seeing how quickly this can go up, 500,000 is nothing. People do millions and millions of requests a day on bigger websites, right? So you can see how that number could go up drastically. Well, we want to keep that super safe, right? In the same way that our social security number, we don't want that to get compromised because it can, cause a lot of havoc. We want to keep that safe. And so what we don't do is just put our API key in plain text, right? And in plain text, what I mean by that is just putting it in our application or in our request. That's where something like a environment variable comes in. It's a way, again, that we can keep it on its own, right? We can still access it. And so whenever we do need to pass it, we can say, hey, that value, my secret value, go ahead and give that value to them, and then it'll make the request. But then if we put it to GitHub, or if anybody can see our code, if it's open source, that's not going to be available. They're not going to know my secret key. And so therefore I'm not going to get charged. I see in the chat, is this, oh yeah, office hours recorded. And yeah, Austin, I've seen Uber does this and Maps, right? So you can kind of do either. So Apple Maps and Google are really the kings. And then there was one called Waze, but Waze got bought by Google, but it's not a monopoly. So really those are kind of your two options, and people can build off of those. Same thing with like weather APIs. It's really challenging. All the big players just own the weather stuff. So any sort of weather on your application, are just API calls that you can use. Cool. So what do we do? Is it just out of the box that we can use this? Not necessarily. If you're using React sometimes, or some of these sort of pre-built things, like whenever you did like a create React app, or you used Vite to create React, what it did is, you probably remember, it created a bunch of different files for your file structure. Within that, it might create a .env file. But we're going to just pretend that you didn't do this. So that way, if you need to do that, or if you need to kind of create this on your own, or especially for your application, whether you use Python or Java or JavaScript, it might be a little bit different if you're using Python or Java. All you have to look up is .env for Java, and there will be an article, or there will be something on it. And for Python, same thing. It might be a little bit different, but this is how we're going to do in JavaScript. It's super easy to switch it up. Okay. So let's go ahead and create that. I've got this lecture.js, right? Office hour, sorry. Office hour.js. This is my file, and we are going to kind of follow this and build it out so that way we can see and access and deal with that. Cool. So what we need is, let's again pretend that it's not coming out of the box, meaning that we don't already have this available. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go access my terminal. And I've already got my terminal. Let me make that bigger for you guys. I've already got this up and I'm already in my project, right? I'm in lecture 2. And if I check here, this is lecture 2. Cool. I'm in my spot. So all I'm going to say is npm install. And I believe it's just .env. Yep. So npm, or you could say I instead of install. Node package manager is what this npm stands for, and it's .env. You guys should all have node package manager because I believe in web fundamentals, when you used node or you downloaded node, I believe npm came with that. So you should have npm. If you don't, we can kind of talk offline and try to get that figured out, or you can figure that out. But you should already have it. So if I say npm install .env, it's going to install env or .env. Cool. Here, if it's just saying packages are looking for funding, I believe that's just people are doing open source and they're trying to get paid, right? They're not saying, hey, I'm doing all this work, will you give me some money? So if you see that, don't worry about it. We do need to like buy people coffee if they do open source. That's great, but don't worry about it. Cool. So we are good to go here. So now what I'm going to do is within my folder structure, and you could do it outside. We'll talk about, actually, we'll do one with and one without, and we can kind of see how we access that. But let's create a .env file. This .env file stands for our environment variables. This is where we're going to put our secrets. This is where we're going to have all of our secret stuff, whether it's our database password and our database login information, whether it's our API keys, whether it's my social security number, whatever it is, we want to put our secret stuff in here. So let's go ahead and create a value here that's going to say, we'll say API key. Now, in our .env, you don't have, similar to Python, where you don't have to say like var, you're not doing any of that. It knows that this is just an environment variable. So you say API key. It is pretty common to put it in all caps. And then I'm just going to create the string. This is my super secret API key. Cool. So I've now created my API key in my .env file. Awesome. Now, how do we do it? Well, if we come back here, we can see that we need to, in our application, require and configure the package like this. So at the top of my file, I'm going to say require. And then what am I going to say? It was require .env .config. Cool. And so now, and this is just because we have one file, you put this in your main app file, and you should be able to access it. But we've already created our .env file. We've again done it however, we added whatever sort of secret information we wanted. As you can see here, again, it is typically all caps, and then you do it by snake case. So it's just an underscore for every of the word. Is that going to change things? No, right? It's just sort of the structure that we typically do this in. And then now, when we are dealing with our, when we want to now retrieve it, right? So we've configured our file. Great, we can do this. Now I want to retrieve it. I can say print process dot env dot, and then my key name. So we could say API key. I'm a little hesitant right now because this wasn't auto-completing like I thought it would. So we might just be problem solving and figuring this out. Let's see. If I run this, it should print. This is my super secret API key. Oh, whoops. I did it in my lecture. We'll do it. Sorry, guys. We're gonna do it in office hour. Okay, we got an issue here. Print is not defined. Oh, of course.
Console.log.
Yeah, I was writing in Python earlier. Okay,
I'm
there
like,
we go.
wait a minute.
Yeah, my fault. My fault. Let's try it again. Okay. So you see that what it did is when we have this, thanks, Colin. Sorry, yeah. When we have this require.env config, what it's doing is it's configuring our .env. It's making sure we have the package so that way we can then call this process.env here, and it knows that we're talking about a variable, and it's then referring to this file right here. So what happened is it goes and loads it. Okay, great. We're ready to use .env. So now I have access to my environment variable call, or this property right here, this process.env. And then we put dot in whatever the key name is, right? So, or whatever the variable is. So in this case, we called it API key. Therefore, we put API key here. If I've got another one, just to kind of prove, if you guys have had anything with me, you know that I always use unicorn. The reason I use unicorn is just to show you it could be anything, right? It's something outrageous and wild. So I always use unicorn for that. 56. So what I can do is, again, all I do if I want to access it, I can say console.log process.env.unicorn. And then now, oops, wrong terminal. Sorry about that. I run it again, and I get the number 56. Are there any questions for what we've done right now?
Yeah, I have a you have line number 1 required dot conf versus import dot env from dot env. Are they the same thing?
Let's try it. So if I say import, let's see,
.env.
.env let's text this. What I'm thinking is, well, first off, it's not going to know because this terminal is different. But if I just say node office. Okay, import statement. Import cannot outside of module. So it doesn't love that.
Oh, is it because of that dependency, like the type module stuff? I don't know, when we do like Express or React.
Yeah, I think because this is very base, like this is just a JS file. It doesn't have any of that stuff from the package or any sort of like things that are coming out of the box of React.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. One more question. If you are on terminal, if you type just env, it just give you all the environment on your terminal. That's also different stuff, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's different. That's different stuff. That's different environment variables, or there might be environment variables for this terminal itself. Because you'll have a bunch of different things. If you use GitHub, then you've sort of set those global environment variables. So each sort of kind of like if you have GitHub or if you have Git on there, you have different things for that. So yeah, these are different. This might be environment variables that out of the gate VS Code's terminal uses that are already sort of pre-built for you. But this is us creating our own environment variables.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Great questions.
Okay, I got a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you go to the env file point, please? .env. Okay, so I understand why you're doing .env and then .unicorn to get 56. But why do you got to put process there to begin with? You're not
That's
in a
part of the
process folder or anything.
Yeah, great question. That's part of, remember when we downloaded the .env package? That's just the way that we do that. With Python, we use like os.environ, which is the way, again, .env, but it's just a way that that the .env package has packaged everything up in order for us to go grab stuff.
Okay.
So like Python, so let me look up Python just to kind of show you. They're kind of the same thing. Python.env. Well, still, so it is a little bit different where you've got this, you do the import just like, can't remember who was saying it, but just like you were saying, but then you use this os.getenv and then you do the access key. It's just the way that the actual package sets it up in order for us to deal with it. I'm not exactly sure why the nuances of using process.env, but it's just the way that the package sets it up.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
I've got a MERN related question.
On this or on?
Yeah, with this.
Yeah, go ahead.
So like when, or if we're using a mongoose.config file, is it called basically the same way with the process.env.api key, or is that a different process?
I'm trying to think of your config file is going to be, are you in your config file, are you grabbing any information in the same way?
We import from a connect from Mongoose, and then we also import .env from .env, and then we call .env.config.
Oh yeah, so then you're doing the same thing. You're using the same package.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
And so if you are, then maybe that's what you're thinking. Yeah, so when you downloaded that in the React actual like package, when you're creating a React app, you're grabbing all that information. So if you're importing from .env, you know, then the way we import it, again, this is just a very basic elementary way where we don't have some of those fun nuancy stuff or the kind of extras with it. So we have to go the long route of, you know, saying things like all this. But if you already have that, it'd be the same exact thing, Taryn. Yeah.
Gotcha.
You're
Okay,
doing
thank you.
you're doing the exact same thing. So if you already have that, then you can just follow that same process, but you can create a .env file as well. And then you can be able to access that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah, that's actually my point. Required versus import.env. That's actually Mongo's config file.
Yeah.
That's how we do for Node.js.
Yeah, because whenever you use, because you guys use Vite, right? We use Vite to create that. Yeah, it used to be create React app. Vite's way better. So whenever you do Vite and you actually create that, it brings in everything for you. So you have all these little helper properties and helper packages to make it a lot easier. In the same
there
way
was.
Go ahead, Shane.
Oh, sorry. There was a small hiccup at the beginning of our MERN stack where like it went to like an old version. We had access to an old version of the MERN stack. And
weird, yeah.
suddenly it was like, go in here and do create React app and all this stuff. And it was so confusing. And I was like,
It's
dude,
very-
what happened to Vite? Like, what?
Mhm.
Did they update it?
Mm-mm.
No, it turns out
Yeah.
they rolled it back by accident and then they
Oh.
fixed it and we were good. So
We love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, Vite's way better, and then it's not as heavy and it doesn't take as long. Okay. So last step with dealing with environment variables is we have to have a .getignore file. GNORE. And so what this .getignore file is when we are pushing this repository up to GitHub or any sort of our repository managers, there are other ones outside of GitHub. I would encourage just use GitHub. It's the market leader. This is what recruiters are going to use. It's owned by Microsoft. But there are other ones, like if you work for a company that is using AWS, they use Code Commit. There's one called a Git Bucket. There's a whole bunch. Yeah, but just use GitHub. But anyways, whenever we are pushing our code, there might be files we don't want to push up, i.e., we don't want to push up this environment variable that's really all of our, this .env file, sorry, that is all of our secret information. So within our .getignore, we can just put .env. And so what that's going to do is now, if I were to push this to GitHub, it's going to take every file and push it except for .env here. If you guys took the MERN stack, then you know that you definitely don't want to do node modules because it is massive, right? So you want to get, you want to ignore that as well. But again, when we're dealing with a .env file, we want to make sure that we are not pushing that to GitHub. So as a rule of thumb, if you are creating a .env file, make sure that you immediately go create a .gitignore if you don't already have it, and go add that in. Because I have personally also forgotten that and pushed it to GitHub, and then it's like a whole pain. Yeah, so just don't do it because you have to revert back, and it's a whole issue. So, but that's what the gitignore. That's really kind of what we're going to deal with. You know, in the question that I asked for the proposal for, especially for Python and Java, it's like, what are you going to put in your gitignore? This is really the main file that you would put in your gitignore. If you guys are again dealing with JavaScript, or if you want to use any sort of React, you want to get rid of you want to make sure you ignore the node modules as well. Any questions on .env files, environment variables? Again, when you deal with like AWS or Azure, if you have a project up there, you can create environment variables. You can even do that in GitHub, where if you're working on a project, because that's really where it gets to be a challenge, is if you are dealing with a project, right? And sort of think about this for your group project. Let's say that I'm working on something, I'm working on this API, and I have this API key, and I'm working on my code, and somebody wants to grab all of, they want to clone the repository themselves or pull in my code so that way they can test and maybe build out another feature with it. Well, if I have the API key on this .env file, and I don't share that env file, well, their code's not going to work because they're going to need that API key, right? And so either I have to share this file with them, which you can do, not ideal, or within GitHub, we can actually create environment variables for your project itself, which is really, really quite nice. Now, that's usually if it's running, though. I don't know that it will give. I'll do a little bit of research on if it just shows, like if it will show like everybody has access to this file, or if it is, because like with code commit, for example, when you're actually running your code on the server, it'll call from those environment variables. So you don't, it's just like you have one file that everybody can work on. But we're not hosting, so I'll do a little bit of research on that for you guys. I see somebody gave a great description. If you guys are interested on the difference between import.env.
Yeah, it looks like a ChatGPT response to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Great. Thanks for doing that. Tabu. Awesome. Okay. Any other questions on .env? Other than that, I wanted to kind of get a crack at our first algorithm. We'll do it as a class. And just kind of get, again, just the practice of what does this look like? What are some questions we can ask? How can we start approaching these questions? But before we move on to that, anybody have any questions on this .env stuff? I love the blue duck. Okay. Let's, great, go ahead.
It squeaks too.
Awesome. Great, go ahead.
I did just want to ask real quick, if there's any big differences between setting these up between JavaScript, Python, Java, and if so, what those differences are.
There's not. Like if you were to, great question. If you were to see like Python, it's pretty similar. You just download, it might just be python.env or python-env.
Cool.
And then you load it, and then you have to bring in OS, and then you just say os.get-env. This is a tool.
Cool.
If you
And
guys,
this is super accessible too. Like you're just Googling.
Yeah, I just Googled
Java.env. Yeah.
Yeah. This is a tool right here called grepper. If you guys are interested, I don't have any affiliation or anything with it, but it's an extension that I like. That it's just a Google Chrome extension. So if you ask a question, people will actually post questions and they sort of upvote them. So it'll give you, some code quickly. So instead of you having to go to a website, you could just go to grepper. Or if you type like how I typed this in, somebody wrote all this out. And so I don't have to
Mhm.
actually like click on a website. It just is already here. I can take this and move forward. It's just called
Cool.
grepper. So that's why it looks
I
like
think
that.
there's some like AI sweeping features in some browsers too that'll show
Yeah.
you stuff like this too.
Yeah, there's one called Search Labs for
Mm,
that uses Bard. Yeah, grepper, Grepper.
cool. Thank you,
Yeah,
man.
it's
Yeah.
like
Yeah, of course.
the Linux command grep. That's what it makes me think of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's probably honestly what it had inspiration from. Okay,
I may or may not have practiced red teaming a little bit.
that's awesome.
Will,
Yeah.
you said in JavaScript they'd use it if they were using React. In Python, we'd use it with what?
I'm sorry, what is your question? You would use it within Python. What I was saying was with JavaScript, when you download React, if you were to, because you didn't take that, right? Trail, you just took Python?
Yeah, just Python.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So with React, you have to create a package and it kind of creates a new project using something called Vite. And so Vite is this big package manager, bundles things up really nicely, and it's like, cool, you're good to go. And it gets all the files. Part of what Vite does is it downloads .env for you. All you have to do with Python is you just follow this right here. You install using python-env. At the top of the file, you say from .env import load.env. You load it. So this is you calling the function to actually load it. Now it has access. You also put this import here, and then you can access it .env. So it's the same thing. You're just saying that when you used Vite for React, it already downloaded it for you. Python doesn't.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's super accessible with Java, Python, or JavaScript.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so what I thought was we've got a fun little algorithm here that I thought we could kind of walk through and get just an understanding and an approach and hopefully do one of these, one of these a week, two of these a week, just to kind of get you guys familiar with what this looks like. So here's how the job is. Well, let me backtrack. Would it be better if I stopped the recording here and then kept it as a separate one so you guys could go back to this, or do you want just one office hour, one lecture? Separate. Okay. Anybody else have strong feelings or so? I just don't want you to have to like fast forward from .env every time if you're like, what did he say?
Separate is fine.
Okay. I'm gonna
Yeah,
stop
separate's
this.
good.